This is something I experienced firsthand, and it still haunts me to this day. 3 years ago, I witnessed a gruesome murder case that left me with severe PTSD. Ever since then, I couldn't stand the sight of meat without feeling dizzy and nauseous. But one night, I had this vivid nightmare where I killed a woman and ate her flesh. I woke up sweating and gasping for air, terrified by the realism of the dream. That day, I was sitting in a vegetarian cafe, trying to keep to my new diet, when a family sat next to me. Their kid was happily munching on a fried chicken leg. Just watching him eat made my stomach churn, and I rushed out of the cafe, feeling sick. I remembered leaning against the wall outside, trying to catch my breath when everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed. They told me I had a breakdown, a mental illness rooted in the trauma from the murder case. But honestly, I didn't remember anything about the case, not a single detail. I never really believed what the doctors said. I thought I was just having trouble sleeping, and occasionally got medication from a friend who happened to be a psychologist. His name was Dr. Luke. People often jump to conclusions and twist the truth, so I didn't pay much attention to their gossip. "Michael, you awake?" I heard Dr. Luke's voice as I tried to focus my eyes. I touched my forehead and asked, "Luke, do you think I'm really sick?" He was packing up some books and replied without looking at me, "Come on, not eating meat doesn't mean you're sick. If that's the case, then half the world must be ill." I tried to sit up and said, "But don't you think it's a bit extreme? It was just a kid eating chicken." He replied, "It's an overreaction. Many vegetarians can't stand the sight of meat. It's like a subconscious resistance. But why did you go to that cafe in the first place? You never used to." "I don't know. I just found myself there, and then I saw that kid." Are you feeling any better now?" "Sort of." Our conversation was cut short when a woman burst into the office, ignoring the nurse's attempts to stop her. She was panicked and shouted, "Dr. Luke, I think I have multiple personality disorder." The nurse apologized for not being able to stop her. I left to give them some privacy, but that interaction stayed with me. That night, I had the same nightmare again. The image of the kid eating chicken came to my mind, followed by a vision of a man crouched next to a woman lying on the ground. The woman's eyes were wide open, staring at me, sending shivers down my spine. The man suddenly turned towards me, his face covered in blood, a chunk of flesh hanging from his mouth. I woke up feeling suffocated, struggling to breathe. I desperately reached for my phone to call Dr. Luke, but passed out before I could dial. The following day, I tried to visit Dr. Luke at the hospital, but was told he was off that day. Confused and restless, I decided to go to his apartment. When I reached Dr. Luke's apartment, I was surprised to see him in a police uniform. "Luke?" I asked, baffled. He seemed just as surprised to see me. "Michael, what are you doing here?" he asked. I stammered, "Your outfit. Are you a cop?" He checked his watch and said, "I'll explain later. Wait for me. And with that, he left. Later, I learned that Dr. Luke was actually a forensic psychologist working with the police. That day, he was called to a crime scene in the suburbs, a bizarre case where a butcher was found dead in his own yard. The cause of death was heart failure, induced by extreme fear. Titeln Dark Luke and the investigation team were puzzled. The butcher, a heavy-set man in his mid-40s, had no physical injuries or signs of a struggle. He just dared a fright in his backyard. They suspected a connection to a cold case from 3 years ago based on some forensic evidence. The next day, I tried to talk to Dr. Luke about my nightmares, but before I could say much, he got a call about another case. A woman claiming to have multiple personalities. She had reported finding unfamiliar items in her house and feeling like she was losing control. That night, the nightmares returned, more vivid than ever. I dreamed of the butcher and the mysterious man from my earlier dreams. This time, I was the man, and I felt a rush of excitement and power. Waking up from this dream, I was drenched in sweat and shaking uncontrollably. I went to Dr. Luke's apartment again, but this time he was different. He was cold, distant. When I told him about my dream, he seemed deeply troubled but tried to reassure me. It was just a dream. As days passed, things got weirder. I started finding things in my apartment that I didn't remember buying. Books on criminal psychology, black clothes that weren't my style, and a keychain I didn't recognize. I felt like I was losing my mind. One day, I found meat in my fridge, which was odd, because I'd been avoiding meat since the PTSD. I panicked and called Dr. Luke, who suggested I come to his office right away. In his office, he confronted me with a theory that shocked me to the core. He believed I might have a split personality, another side of me that I wasn't aware of. To prove his point, he showed me surveillance footage of me buying meat and black clothes, things I had no memory of. I was in denial, but Dr. Luke was convinced. He said this other personality might be connected to the murder case I witnessed 3 years ago. He believed that witnessing the crime had caused a fracture in my psyche, creating this other, more violent personality. I was horrified. Dr. Luke arranged for me to stay in a secure facility for observation. That night, as I lay in a strange bed, surrounded by white walls and the hum of security cameras, I realized the truth of Dr. Luke's words. It was me, or rather this other part of me, who had been living this double life. And now I was trapped in my own mind with a stranger who was capable of unspeakable things. The terror wasn't from some external threat, it was from within, a part of me that I couldn't control or understand. The real nightmare was knowing that I could never be sure who I was, the mild-mannered Michael or the monster lurking in the depths of my own mind. So this is probably one of the craziest experiences I've ever had, and even now it feels surreal talking about it. I guess I'll start from the beginning. My name is Alex. and I was a grad student at a university in a mundane small town in the US, studying psychology. Life wasn't easy. I came from a single-parent family. My mom had been bedridden for years because of a chronic illness, and I was juggling jobs and studies to keep us afloat financially. The opportunity for an international exchange program popped up, and the fees were astronomical. That's when I heard about the Starlight Scholarship offered by a local non-profit to one deserving student annually, covering $1 million. The interview for the scholarship went south when the panelists bluntly told me that my academic achievements, though impressive, were not unique enough to merit the award. Desperate, I was asked if I had any unusual experiences to share. Now this is where things get weird. There was this young and charismatic professor at our university, Dr. Jason Hart. He was renowned for his work in cognitive psychology and had a knack for hypnotism, a subject I was deeply skeptical about. One day, Dr. Hart demonstrated a daydreaming technique in class, claiming it was a form of light self-hypnosis. He made us go through some motions, and to my utter disbelief, managed to make me experience a vivid simulation of pressure on my arms, guiding my hands to clasp together involuntarily. I was shocked and a bit frightened, honestly. After class, I confronted him, questioning the ethics of using hypnotism on students. Surprisingly, he admitted to finding my intellect and skepticism a perfect match for something he had been planning. Fast forward, I was invited to his private clinic after hours, where he worked as a psychologist. He explained that hypnotism, contrary to popular belief, was just a method of suggestion and couldn't force anyone to act against their will. He offered to prove it by erasing his name from my memory temporarily, a stunt he performed flawlessly. Intrigued and seeing no harm, I agreed to learn more, driven by the promise of financial help for my mom. That's when things took a dark turn. Dr. Hart was approached by a wealthy client, worried about his wife's emotional instability after uncovering his affair. The husband was desperate to save his marriage for the sake of their children without giving up on his mistress. Dr. Hart staged a performance of hypnotism for me to witness, subtly manipulating the wife's memory to erase any recollection of the affair, thereby saving the marriage. The husband paid handsomely for this service. My training under Dr. Hart revealed his unethical practices. He wasn't just a psychologist, he was manipulating people's memories for profit, exploiting their vulnerabilities. The final straw came when Dr. Hart attempted to use me in a scheme involving a client who wished to forget her lottery win, hoping to keep the prize from her soon-to-be ex-husband. The session ended with me blanking out, having been programmed to eliminate any memory of the incident. It was only by sheer luck that the woman's husband intervened, exposing Dr. Hart's manipulation. The police got involved, but due to the hypnosis, I had no memory of my actions, which spared me from legal consequences. Talking about this ordeal, sharing the level of manipulation and ethical breach I witnessed and was part of, secured me the scholarship. But it left me questioning the real extent and morality of psychological manipulation. And there you have it, my brush with hypnotism gone wrong. I'm still trying to make sense of it all, but I guess some experiences are just too bizarre to fully comprehend. Last night was one of those experiences you never forget, no matter how hard you try. It was past 11 p.m., and I was about to call it a night when there was a knock at my door. My assistant peeked in. "We don't have any more sessions scheduled for today, right?" I asked, rubbing my temples. "Actually, there's one last client, Miss Elliot, sent over by her counselor," he informed me. "All right, let her in," I sighed, setting aside my notes. A young girl, pale as a sheet and looking no more than 12, entered. "Miss Elliot?" The title seemed too old for her. Without waiting for an invitation, she made herself comfortable on the couch. "I can see ghosts," she blurted out, catching me off guard with her bluntness. Ignoring her lack of manners, I asked, "Can you share some examples?" She scowled. "It's Miss Elliot to you? And what's the point?" "You won't believe me anyway," she retorted, her icy stare making it hard to maintain eye contact. "How will you know? Unless you tell me," I countered calmly. She hesitated, but eventually began her tale. "There was this stormy night. I jumped out of bed at a clap of thunder and noticed a shadowy figure pass by my window. I didn't think much of it until I heard this horrifying scraping noise against the glass, like knives on bone," she described, with a strangely vivid analogy that didn't quite sit right. "Continue, please," I urged, despite the oddities in her story. "I was hiding under my blankets when suddenly my window flew open and I saw a rotten pig's hoof reaching inside," she continued, and I couldn't help but let out a laugh, immediately regretting it. "Sorry, please go on." Anger flashed across her face as she spoke of the ghastly figure standing at her window, a woman in decay who paradoxically remained dry despite the pouring rain. Her detailed observation under such circumstances seemed unbelievable, yet her fear appeared genuine. "The woman told me she didn't mean any harm. She was there to take me with her because, according to her, I was already dead. I was terrified," she recalled. At that moment, her nanny came in and the apparition disappeared. The encounter ended there, but Miss Elliot's chilling glare stayed with me. Trying to lighten the mood, I asked if she had other ghost encounters. She mentioned a trip to Thailand, where she sought a monk to rid her of her fears via a special herbal drink. The drink turned blood red, and a grotesque baby appeared, trying to strangle her until she spilled the concoction. Terrified, she fled the temple. Feeling the session dragging, I suggested we proceed with hypnotherapy. I guided her into a trance with my watch, and soon she was describing a world filled with flowers, especially red ones reminiscent of blood. A door appeared in her trance, oozing blood from the keyhole, which I tried to downplay as tomato sauce. But suddenly she screamed, lunging at me with a decayed appearance and a foul stench. Terrified, I stumbled back and everything went black. When I came to, she was gone, leaving me to ponder the bizarre encounter. Outside, if I had looked, I might have seen a black cat conversing with a figure in the shadows, planning their next move, far from their otherworldly origins. But some details are better left to the imagination. In the end, this was one client I'd never forget. A story intertwining fear, disbelief, and the unexplainable. Just another night in the life of a consultant in the supernatural, or so it seemed. Hey everyone, my name's Emily. It's something I've never spoken about before. It's about my journey with the peculiar online support group and my father, Jack. It all started when I received a strange message from a Facebook group called The Final Wish. It was a community where members pledged to fulfill the dying wishes of others. The message was simple. If anyone's still around, can you please go to Sweet Treats Bakery and enjoy a cheesecake on my behalf? Coincidentally, Sweet Treats was right below my apartment. Glancing at Jack, who was sitting quietly beside me, I decided to fulfill this strange request. Jack, my father, hadn't been himself for years. Ever since an altercation with the police where he was tased, he had become a shell of the man he once was. The bakery didn't have cheesecake that day, so I settled for apple pie, snapping a picture to post in the group. No cheesecake today, but the apple pie isn't bad either. After sending the message, I noticed Jack had wandered off again. This was normal for us. I'd even put a tracker on him for such occasions. The group was surprisingly active. I rarely spoke, but I read the conversations. That day, I decided to post a question. Has anyone tried carbon monoxide? The responses varied, but they were all disturbingly casual. Following the GPS tracker, I found Jack at a nearby park, eating something. I rushed over worried and swatted the item from his hand. It was a piece of apple pie. Trying to lead him home, he resisted, clinging to a trash can. Bystanders gave us looks of confusion and pity, but one gaze among them was different, eager, expectant. The man took a photo of us and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The group's dynamics became increasingly alarming. Members would regularly share their attempts and failures at ending their lives, and the admin, a guy named Luke, seemed disturbingly fascinated with these tales. I learned more about Luke. He'd started this group after becoming a psychologist. He seemed to have a savior complex, wanting to help people by giving them a space to express their darkest thoughts. But there was something off about him. Then came the day of the mass gathering. A member had completed their suicide, and their last wish was for us to attend their funeral and sing "If I Die Young." I went more out of a sense of morbid curiosity than anything else. At the funeral, as a teenager sang, a disturbing scene unfolded. Several members in a bizarre pact began to harm themselves. I froze, witnessing the chaos. Jack, seeing the blood, had a violent reaction. He started screaming and convulsing. It was the first time I saw him react so violently to anything since his incident. In the following days, a sinister pattern emerged in the group. Those who fulfilled the last wishes often became the next to die. And horrifyingly, I was next on the list. I decided to investigate Luke and broke into his social media. What I found chilled me to the bone. His posts were full of places I had been, moments I had lived. The first post dated back to the year I left my hometown. It was a picture of an alleyway with the caption, "I will find you." I suddenly realized Luke was obsessed with me. He had orchestrated this entire scenario, from the group to the twisted game of fulfilling last wishes, all to manipulate and control. Confronting Luke, I learned the horrifying truth. He had known my mother, who had taken her own life years ago. Her last wish was for someone to enjoy a cheesecake, a luxury she never afforded herself in life. Luke had used her story to lure me into his macabre world. I left the group, reporting it to the authorities. Investigations began, but I knew the damage was done. Too many lives lost, too many families shattered. As for Jack, I moved him to a care facility where he could get the help he needed. Some nights I lie awake, thinking about the group and how close I came to being another one of Luke's victims. The experience has left me with a deep mistrust of online communities and a resolve to protect those I love from unseen dangers lurking behind screens.